Hi there. My name is Dr. Nicole Novroski, and today I'm here to speak to you about forensic science education in the COVID era. And I'm going to discuss the challenges, victories, and a novel pedagogical approach for the future that we've implemented at the University of Toronto. And I'd love to hear about how you've implemented said measures at your institutions or organizations as well. So just to get started, I want to talk a little bit about the forensic science program at the University of Toronto. So the University of Toronto is a tri-campus system. We have the St. George campus, which is housed in downtown Toronto, the Scarborough campus, which is a remote campus in the Scarborough area, so on the east end of the general Toronto area. And then we have the Mississauga campus, which is on the west end of the GTA. And these three campuses all comprise a tri-campus system of the University of Toronto, where we have over 50,000 undergraduates, over 10,000 faculty, and thousands of staff, support staff, other coming and going students, a large graduate student body, etc. So the University of Toronto is an extremely large academic institution within Canada and has been around for quite some time. With regard to the forensic science program in particular, we are the oldest program in Canada, which is something to be quite proud of. And our faculty is quite diverse in terms of composition. So we have both traditional forensic bench scientists, we have traditional bench scientists that don't specialize in the forensic sciences, so biologists, chemists, etc., that complement our program. We partner with law enforcement, and we have law enforcement as part of our faculty. We also bring in and staff legal and civil professionals that cross all of the disciplines within the forensic sciences. So our program is quite unique in terms of its composition, in terms of who we have at both the undergraduate and graduate level teaching, as well as the diversity of programs and courses that we can offer our students. With this, there are inherent challenges trying to accommodate busy work schedules, trying to accommodate those who are still actively working in the field of forensic science and supplementing their lives with additional teaching responsibilities. So what's really great about the forensic science program is that we have both day and night courses, and we can cater to, at times, those part-time students who are trying to fulfill that forensic science degree dream by offering a variety of coursework. Our main tracks or disciplines that we tend to focus on currently are forensic anthropology, forensic biology, forensic chemistry, and forensic psychology. So we offer these four main streams currently, and we're introducing in the coming years a forensic toxicology stream for those who are interested in pursuing toxicology in their future. Forensic anthropology and forensic biology are both offered at the graduate level in terms of research-specific master's and doctoral theses. However, that is faculty dependent based on the tenure stream faculty who are currently in the program. Within our program at UTM, we have the option for students to complete a specialist degree, so where their focus is primarily in one of the main tracks that I just mentioned, or a major degree where they're completing a forensic science major coupled with another science or math major or minors. And then we also now offer a minor program. So for those who have an interest in forensic science but don't want to pursue that as their main focus at university, there is a minor program where they can supplement their current learning or discipline with some forensics classes just so that they become familiar and are engaged in the forensic sciences. Just to give you a quick visual insight into our program, we do try and provide our students at all levels a very interactive and engaging experience. This has a lot of hands-on components. So with that, there have been many inherent challenges this year. of note, or the things that I would like to focus on the most, are the fact that we really pride ourselves on having engaging lab experiences. So all of our disciplines in the upper years have actual lab components where students are getting forensic biology, forensic chemistry, forensic anthropology, hands-on experience in the lab, so that they understand how these disciplines then translate into the real world, or how these skills and techniques that they're learning in lab translate into the positions they may hold in the future. And because our staff and faculty come from backgrounds that are very rich in terms of forensic experience, we're able to bring a very strong and comprehensive program to our students. We also offer field school, and we tend to focus in two specific areas. So we have the forensic anthropology field school, where students literally go out into the woods and are sifting through a crime scene and recovering human remains and going through all of the processes that are necessary in order to establish the biological sex, ancestry, etc., of the human remains, and process that case in a traditional way that a forensic anthropologist would process it. We also have our forensic ident field school, and that is led by a retired constable from the forensic ident unit of a police agency in Canada, where students then go through how a traditional law enforcement officer would process scenes. And so our students really are getting a lot of hands-on and field-based experience within our undergraduate program. It's really wonderful that we're able to offer such a strong and diverse program to our students, but you can understand that in light of COVID, a lot of our programming has been challenged by the lack of availability to have students on campus, as well as ensuring our social distancing measures and everything else that has come along with the challenges that the pandemic has brought. So I just want to quickly go through the Canadian COVID-19 timeline. I know that on a global scale, we're all well aware of what's happened, but thinking more regionally for us and how our program specifically has been impacted, I think it's just important, or it might be helpful for everyone who's watching to understand what we did and how we were able to respond. So thinking back to last year, March 16th obviously was a big turning point. We had our official closure of the university, all 3 campuses. All courses and all research labs were immediately halted and switched to online processes. What this meant was we were at the tail end of our semester. Our semester ends in early April, so we did encounter several obstacles trying to immediately transition to an online environment. But U of T put a halt on everything for that 2-week initial window while we navigated what the pandemic was going to bring. Of course, as everyone is well aware, those closures were well extended past the 2-week period. So everything in the winter term for 2020 was then pushed online, including a final exam session, which was obviously a first for the university, and faculty and staff really stepped up to navigate what that would look like. And of course, there were a lot of challenges. We encountered increased amounts of plagiarism. We encountered increased amounts of technical difficulties, time zone issues, everything that you can surely imagine or experience yourselves in terms of that initial reaction to the immediate closure. In May, we launched our first remote-only term for summer coursework. All of the research labs and in-field or practical components of our coursework remained closed or not offered. So that was an incredibly unique challenge, especially from the forensic science program, where we had students already enrolled in those field schools and were gearing up for graduation. In June, the university issued an opportunity to reopen labs with very, very strict criteria. So all labs were assessed in terms of space and social distancing capabilities. how many individuals can we safely put in our labs, what PPE is required to ensure that our labs are operating safely, etc. We were required to submit comprehensive lab reopening plans in terms of who is required to be on campus, so who are our designated personnel, what students really needed to be on campus, again, trying to mitigate the risk for everybody. And this was approved through our Office of the Vice Principal Research. We also had very strict hours in terms of our lab operations, so 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., to ensure that our facilities and anybody that needed to be able to respond in case of emergency was available. So no more of those late nights in the lab. Everything was quite restricted to those daytime hours. So over this summer, we saw a lot of lab reopenings. We saw a little bit of movement back to campus from faculty in terms of maybe just wanting to get back in the office to settle affairs that had been lingering from the spring term, and then trying to really gear up and prep for the fall and whatever that was going to look like. Our fall term brought a hybrid learning environment, meaning that the university did offer critical courses that were required in person, hybrid courses where students had the option to either be at home or come into the classroom, and then those courses that were offered completely online. Why we had such a diversity of course offerings was to cater to our students. So the University of Toronto in general brings in quite a few international students. We have a large international student body, and with the restrictions for travel and bringing students back with the Canadian government policies, i.e. that 14-day mandatory quarantine, it was very difficult to have students return and then be forced to stay in their homes and then be under the stay-at-home order policies that exist in Ontario currently and then back in the fall. So we were trying to essentially create an environment that was conducive to all. Essential coursework, like I mentioned, was allowed to go forward in person if necessary. So those critical labs where students required getting those hands-on skills where something couldn't be provided in a remote setting moved ahead in person. What this meant was, A, the faculty member had to be comfortable, B, the teaching assistants had to be comfortable to come on campus, and C, the students enrolled in the course had to be comfortable to come on campus. So of course you can understand that this brought in and of itself quite a few challenges. In October, within the province of Ontario, where Toronto is, we had increased lockdown measures, and these varied but continued to cycle through the end of the year. This made it increasingly challenging and stressful for faculty and students alike, as we were constantly navigating what policies were in place at the government level and then at the university level in order to navigate our instruction and our ability to complete the courses. Moving into 2021, we again kept a hybrid learning environment offered through our winter term. Winter in Canada obviously is quite cold. We have the increased challenges of weather, etc. And so here again, faculty and students alike were navigating what was critical, when did we have to be on campus? So faculty in this instance moved more towards the hybrid learning when possible and really reduced the number of critical or essential courses that were taught on campus. The government restrictions have increased in 2021, making it even more difficult to conduct experiments and be on campus. So in that context, it was very helpful to have an increased number of hybrid or completely remote course offerings for our students. April again brought a new stay-at-home order as our cases continued to increase. And this again further restricted our ability to conduct experiments on campus and to provide course offerings such as the field schools to our students. Going into the summer of 2021, so where we are now, remote learning is currently dominating due to the increased number of variant cases in the Greater Toronto area. Okay, so thinking back to spring and summer 2020, I really want to focus on the pivot at U of T. So thinking about forensic science education and thinking about all of the course offerings that we have for our students, we really had to transition to this remote learning environment in order to serve the diversity of students that we had. Remembering that U of T has a very large international student body, we had a lot of our students returning back to their home provinces and home countries, and it was very important to us to ensure that they were not derailed from their academic trajectory. And so in light of that, we ensured that we could offer the courses that they required, but in a remote setting. For example, our forensic ethics course, using our very innovative and skilled staff and faculty, we were able to develop this train ride or roller coaster of ethics where the student would essentially go down the tracks and make ethical decisions that would lead them either further along the path or to a point of destruction. And it allowed them to essentially test their ethical barometer per se in a way that was engaging and that integrated the course material in a very intellectually stimulating way. And so as we continue to move forward in this online delivery, we're developing more and more tools such as this ethical roller coaster to challenge our students to think about the course material while still being engaged at the computer. Of course, when it came to labs, we didn't have the ability to offer those in-person placements, so we moved to online demos and we canceled our in-person opportunities over the summer. What the online demos typically entailed was a YouTube or a first-person view of the experiment so that students could essentially visualize what they would be doing with their hands without actually carrying it out themselves. Of course, this brings large challenges within the field of forensic science simply because you need to be able to have those technical skills to then walk into a crime lab or to then walk into another lab setting. So a little bit of challenge there in terms of really developing the skills for the students. However, we are doing the best we can to ensure that they are getting that experience or they're getting the theory and at best possible practical component of the course. We, of course, had to abort or cancel a lot of the ongoing projects. So thinking back to March 2020, a lot of students were working on their capstone projects, and those came to an abrupt end in terms of the field or in-person components. What that meant was we wrapped up what we could and we made do with the results that were already tabulated. However, those projects that were potentially going to publication were then put on hold until experiments could be completed. That was, of course, a big disappointment for both faculty, practitioners, and students alike, but I'm hopeful that we are going to get back on track this year. The second point I want to bring up was the forensic science research collaborations and funding. So as I'm sure most people are aware, we had a big shift in terms of funding allocation, where most funding was reallocated to COVID-19 scientific research. And that is completely acceptable and understandable in light of the severity of the pandemic. However, that does obviously impose severe challenges on those not working in that area. Additionally, there were some constraints on the collaborations with outside agencies and labs, simply because everybody was navigating and pivoting in their own direction, and maintaining some of those strong collaborative projects were stressed or put on hold a little bit in terms of re-navigating what type of in-person exchange of either reagents or samples or sample collection, et cetera, could be conducted until things improved. Thinking to fall 2020, our new normal, we have navigated into this hybrid system of having a lot of remote only options, having some hybrid teachings, and then only those essential in-person lab offerings or very specific in-person necessary course requirements. The University of Toronto continues to maintain this strong availability of remote learning. That way it is accessible to our international students. So we don't want to turn away our international students in light of the pandemic. We want to be able to assist them through this as much as is possible, so then when the time is right, we can bring them back on campus. The hybrid model also works well for international students because it allows that flexibility for those who are local to come on campus, but those who are far away to still experience and participate in the learning outcomes of the courses without having to be physically present. The only limitation, and this is specific to the forensic science program, is the in-person component. So those courses like forensic biology or forensic chemistry that have the critical lab components, or in forensic anthropology or forensic ident with the field schools, international students will not be able necessarily to take those courses, or large amendments or accommodations will be required in order to ensure that our international students can still progress through our program without being penalized simply because they can't be on campus. So we are still navigating how that will work, but of course that is a big challenge. We ultimately want our students who are going through this program to develop the technical and practical skills necessary to then go on into their future careers. But of course, as the cases continue to drop and as the restrictions around the globe continue to change, and at times the restrictions lessen, we are bringing more and more international students back to campus in as safe as is possible manner to get them back into the lab or to get them back into the field school so they can wrap up their programs and move on. So again, bringing us back to where we are now, like I mentioned, there is a lot of fluctuation in terms of government regulation and policy. We are currently in a stay-at-home order within the province of Ontario, meaning that absolutely nothing is proceeding on campus that is not absolutely critical, and this involves lab operations as well. So that is creating a little bit more of a restrictive environment for our students, but we have been able to take this past year to really navigate how to perfect or improve our online delivery for everyone involved. It also means a big shift in terms of our forensic scientific projects. So both at the undergraduate and graduate levels, we have a change in terms of how our projects are designed. So instead of doing sample collection from individuals, we're approaching our projects in terms of data mining or looking at previously generated data or repurposing some of our forensic data that has been applied to other projects into new directions. So this is allowing us to alleviate some of that tension in terms of not having enough projects for students or feeling like we can't provide them with an invaluable experience. But it does change the approach or understanding of forensic concepts when students aren't getting that in-person or in-lab experience. Thinking quickly about the impacts on both undergraduates and graduate students, from the undergraduate perspective, the observed impacts, I think, are multifold. So we're seeing a change in resilience. Students are more flexible, it seems, with last-minute changes, but we are also seeing an increased number of mental health issues as a result of potential isolation and the various challenges of doing or participating in online learning from home. Not everybody has the perfect setup, not everybody has the privacy, not everybody can commit the focus necessary to truly engage in some of the coursework that's being delivered remotely. So of course, we are seeing variable levels of resilience from our undergraduates. We're also seeing a shift in expectations. So for some students in vulnerable households, there is an expectation to accommodate so that they do not have to come to campus. And this is understandable. But within the forensic science program, it becomes challenging when we do require an in-person component for some of our courses, because not having them in the classroom means that they will not develop those practical skills that are required for the field. but we also want to be respectful and accommodate whatever it is that they are the challenges that they're encountering within the pandemic. There's also a demand or an increased pressure for virtual over in-person learning. And again, we're doing our best to navigate what is best for the program and best for our students while still ensuring that they are receiving those learning outcomes or able to develop the skills necessary from the courses that we're offering. Of course, the frustration is real for everybody. The constant flux in policies and procedures, both at the institutional and government levels, are creating unnecessary stress for some of our students in terms of, are we going to be in person, are we going to be remote, etc. So we are seeing some variability there in terms of the overall mood in the classroom. The lack of experience, I think, is the most important aspect to consider from the undergraduate impact perspective, simply because if you're not getting the technical skills, how are you then competitive to go into the job market? And that is something that, of course, we're doing our best to mitigate, and we're doing our best to accommodate in terms of developing skills and providing invaluable research opportunities when the time and the restrictions permit. And then, of course, going back to those abandoned projects and publications, that brings in the frustration and the shifted expectations. But we do have several projects that are still incomplete, but then present the new opportunity that when things restore or reopen, we'll have multiple people engaged in these projects to wrap them up and get quick publications out. The graduate impact is slightly different. Obviously, graduate students have very tailored or specifically focused projects, but we're seeing a big shift in responsibility. So in the past year, we've obviously increased our demand for teaching assistants or online course offerings, and that has brought a need for the graduate students to shift from their research into these teaching roles. That's great in terms of developing that teaching and leadership experience, but that does create an impact on their overall research timeline and their focus as a graduate student throughout their program. The shift in focus in terms of projects has also changed. So looking at more data analysis or remote opportunities rather than in-person lab or sample collection based projects. And again, depending on the discipline, this can be more challenging in some fields than others. And the university restrictions in terms of research activities with regard to travel. So if there are collaborations with agencies outside of the province or outside of the country, there are quite severe research restrictions currently in place that prevent students from going to collect samples or perform their necessary bench or field work in order to collect that data. So we are seeing some challenges there that have really been exacerbated over the past year. Finally, we have this concept of delayed timelines and funding challenges. So obviously timelines are being skewed with the shift to teaching and responsibility, and then delays in their overall research, and then the funding associated with that. So reallocation of funds, again, to COVID research and projects has created some disparity in some disciplines, especially the forensic sciences in Canada. And we also have this concept of loss of grant support. So students that are currently funded, in light of the shifts away from research, it does create these weird bottlenecks in terms of how their funding will look in the coming years if they have to extend their timelines. So that is where we are right now. We have these funding challenges in terms of how we're coordinating with agencies, how we're coordinating with our grant funding, et cetera, and what the long-term impacts of those will be are still quite unknown. We have our staffing challenges. So we have reduced or limited capacity staffing on campus and in the lab, but we also have to increase our staff for our virtual and remote delivery. Safety is always the #1 concern at the University of Toronto, so we are being very respectful of the space and time restrictions that are in place both in the classroom and in the lab. And there's currently no expectation for any students, especially graduate students, to be on campus unless critical experiments or operations are required. And then finally, as we can all imagine, there are impacts in terms of productivity. we have this reallocation to a growing number of emails in our inboxes and a growing number of Zoom meetings in our calendars that are taking away from our ability to conduct research. Further, the pressure of constantly being at the computer can be quite draining, and so we are seeing burnout quite a bit sooner than we would typically expect if students and faculty were at the bench. And that takes us to our next steps. So thinking about everything that I've discussed in terms of the University of Toronto lens, when we think about forensic science research and education, what does our future new normal look like? Are we going to be making a lot of adjusted timelines for completion, and are we going to be restructuring our research focus for graduate student projects or undergraduate capstone projects, etc.? Are we going to be moving towards a data analysis approach where you have very few people in the lab generating as much data as possible that can then be disseminated outward? Or how do we continue to move the field forward if we're really limiting our in-person experiences? Second, our international students and collaborators. How do we ensure that we can maintain these relationships? How are we still satisfying our international students when we have strict restrictions in terms of bringing our international students back? Thinking simply about the United States-Canada border, we have a lot of restrictions there in terms of flight travel, in terms of land crossings, and that can be very impeding in terms of fostering relationships with our collaborators and ensuring that we can go and acquire our samples or be present in each other's labs to develop our research endeavors. And then finally, just overall collaborative nature with outside agencies. Everybody is adjusting to new policies and procedures and ensuring that we can still foster a very conducive environment for research collaboration is going to be critical. And so navigating those next steps is going to be interesting, but it seems that everybody wants to get back to work, or a lot of people want to get back to work, and we're seeing a growing interest in redeveloping those relationships between both the academic units and our outside collaborating agencies. Obviously, networking and collaborative challenges from the Zoom perspective, so wanting to get back to those in-person conferences. There's a lot of burnout in terms of virtual conference delivery, the doom of Zoom, I like to say. We're navigating what that looks like, but of course we're seeing an increase in hybrid delivery, at least for 2021, but 2022 and 2023 conferences seem to be moving to in-person opportunities. So that does bring some optimism for that networking and collaborative future. And then finally, this concept of establishing the virtual lab. So like I mentioned, we have been using tools like GoPro and having that headset from the first person view to show students what it looks like to be performing these experiments that they're not getting to do themselves. And I like to think of it more like the Bill Nye the Science Guy type of learning environment where students can follow along the experiments and then apply the theoretical knowledge that they've acquired in their courses to really pull all of the concepts together to ensure that they've met all of the learning objectives in the course. So then I want to turn it to you, the audience, and really wonder, what are the institutional differences that you see or that you've observed between your organization or institution and what's happening here at the University of Toronto? As I can imagine, on a global scale, there's quite a bit of variability just in terms of institutional regulations and either provincial, state, or at the national level regulations and policies as it relates to COVID-19. So what does your teaching or learning experience look like? How has your institution pivoted or established a new normal for forensic science education and research, primarily at the undergraduate level, but I would also love to hear what's happening at the graduate level and how student projects have pivoted in that direction. How have your collaborations or experiential learning opportunities been restored since all of these challenges have been in place? And now where are you going from here? Because I think that this is a great opportunity as the field of forensic science, given that we are so tight-knit, to really share in our challenges and obstacles, and then things that are working well now, in terms of just being able to help each other out and move forward in as positive and as collaborative ways as possible. So please send me your feedback. I would really love to hear what is working for you or what didn't work for you and what you're doing now as a consequence of that. So thank you very much for listening. I really hope that you were able to take something away from today's presentation. I would very much love to hear from you. So here's my contact information, my lab website, if you're interested in learning more specifically about what I do within the field of forensic genetics. And again, thank you for being here and have a wonderful day.